The Pearl, 1947, by John Steinbeck, is a petite little masterpiece about the potential consequences of acquiring massive wealth. Now, for this video, my plan is to do a review followed by an analysis which will contain spoilers. So if you have not read this book and you want to read it without spoilers, which is not necessarily something you want to do with high literature, because as we always say here, there is no such thing as spoiling literature. But if you want to read this without spoilers, I suggest you watch the review, and then once the analysis begins, you click off the video. As much as it pains me for you not to watch the full video, when I've worked so hard on this video and you just want to click off halfway through, I do suggest you do so. I think technically this novel is so short it actually isn't even a novel. This is what we would call a novella. But they did add an introduction to make it a little bit longer, and they added some pictures even, which are quite nice actually. They're kind of tasteful, these pictures. So The Pearl, it's written in 1947. It takes place in Mexico, featuring characters of an indigenous people who are sort of under the thumb of the larger civilization in which they're a part of. There's the people who live in the brush huts. These are the indigenous people, and they sometimes interact with the townspeople who are, of course, like the white people and frequently take advantage of the people in the indigenous community. So the story itself and the message behind the story is brilliant, and this was actually inspired by a folktale that Steinbeck heard of and obviously put it into a novel. He did a brilliant job. He added characters and brought it to life in a way that is very effective. This features, Steinbeckian prose, so the world really blossoms to life in a way that is intricate, ornate, detailed, and you really are able to see things very clearly in this novel. I think that's one of Steinbeck's greatest strengths as a writer, is being able to capture something from a perspective that you might not have seen before. So a great way that authors do this is through their use of verbs, by saying like the sun was swept away or something, as the sun was swept underneath the horizon. Steinbeck does this very effectively, his use of verbs and particular adjectives. There are some sentences in here that just sort of click in a way that's very satisfying and really lends itself to immersion. The downside of his prose, the way I see it, is it's a little bit clunky at times. His paragraphs don't really flow that nicely. It's like you're reading sort of like an average description of something, but then on occasion, and more than just on occasion, very, very frequently, like one sentence in particular will stand out. But as for his descriptions of like broad landscapes and the setting itself, like the whole picture fails to come together as satisfying as it might. But the particulars, the little micro details, stand out very nicely. Comparing this to like the work of Cormac McCarthy, for example. McCarthy is a master of describing landscapes because he does it in this like dreamy way where everything comes together in this like grandiose way. And it's, if we're talking about Blood Meridian here, or most of McCarthy's novels, those take place in Mexico too. Now, the actual story itself and what happens in the novel is really cool. One other major criticism of this novel, probably my biggest criticism of this novel, is the characters and the fact that the characters don't really have any personality at all, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Actually, yes, it is. It's a bad thing. It's bad. The characters don't have any life in them at all. The dialogue is very, very bland and only communicates meaning. There's no real life in the dialogue, which could be intentional. In theory, these people are speaking the old tongue of the people who lived in Mexico, before Columbus and Europeans came here. So that might be like Navajo or something. The old tongue. I don't know. One of the Native American tongues. And maybe like the theory would be like, in translation, the meaning is this very simple, strictly for communication purposes, communication. What the characters say is cool and literary, but the criticism is that they don't sound like real people. It's not fun. It doesn't have emotion. To make a character come to life, you need a character to talk in a way that's almost like sloppy in a way. It doesn't mean that the words don't make sense, but if you listen to the average person talk, they don't have like perfectly clean, articulate prose, unless there's some weird autistic savant person that reads books all day, or like a mathematician or something. Like what are other than extraordinary exceptions, average people use words a little bit loosely. Maybe they'll throw in a like here or other random words. And even though these people are from, a previous time, previous generation, they should still have some personality to their language. There should be some like phrases that show up over and over again. Like one example that stands out to me is I read this Hemingway novel a while ago, and there was this one character from England, and whenever this guy would talk, he would say, "I say," blah, 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 blah. Like he would start all his sentences with, "I say," and then it's not that actually adds that much literary value to the novel, but it adds life to it. It breathes. It makes everything breathe and come to life strongly. And even though Steinbeck does accomplish that with his sentences and his descriptions of the landscape, and another aspect, which I'll discuss in just a moment, there's a really, really cool aspect to this novel and the world and how it's set up, and I'll discuss that in a moment. But we're really, really lacking with the dialogue in this novel. And there's not really much dialogue to base that on, but all of it's just so bland. It's like it is lucky that I know about the poison of the scorpion. Otherwise, there's not even a contraction. Like it is what it says. It wouldn't be it's not my first choice for dialogue. But I understand that there are certain styles of literature where we're purely trying to communicate and we're not necessarily going for the immersion. But I don't know, I think most people are like me and we like a little bit of immersion and we like to, really get into the novel and lose ourselves. But the really cool aspect of the novel that I want to talk about is this recurring description of Kino. Kino is the main character, his experience of the world and the way that he perceives things. So this thing that keeps appearing is music in the novel. Kino, as he's going about his day, perceives the world as like having songs. So in the morning, like he wakes up and he hears the song of the family because he's with his wife and his little kid and everyone's just going about their business. So he hears the song of the family, and then when they get the pearl, he starts to hear the sound of evil, but also like the sound of the song of triumph too. And these songs, I don't know honestly whether that's really how people describe like the world they experience. Indigenous people describe that as their world. But it does ring true and really sort of put you into the perspective of Kino and his wife. And what's cool is it's a very different perspective from how I experience the world, and I'm guessing how you experience the world. I'm guessing you don't just like hear songs all the time. What you probably do feel is vibes of things. Like you get a certain vibe from something, and I think that's what this music is that Kino is hearing all the time. It's not some supernatural thing that like, oh, he's like tapped into like higher spirits and he can hear the music. It's that's just how human beings experience the world, is through feeling emotions and vibes of things. And there's different ways that we can interpret those feelings and vibes. One way is to use language to articulate them, or if you're like Kino and the indigenous folk in this story, maybe you experience them as songs. If you guys have been around this channel for a little while, you might know that I'm actually a believer in a controversial theory from a psychologist named Julian Jaynes. And Julian Jaynes' theory is not a theory, actually, it's a hypothesis. And his hypothesis is that we human beings, before we were fully conscious, we would experience the world by hearing voices in our heads. And that when our ancestors would hear these voices, they would be interpreted as gods. But ancient man didn't necessarily only hear gods. Ancient man would also, perceive spirits in the forest and hear songs like in this novel. And there's a very compelling argument for why this should be the case. I'm not going to get too much into the weeds here, but the point is that this really resonates as true, that this sort of experience of hearing music in the world and letting that be your orienting principle of how you see things. So overall, I give this a B+. It's a really, really cool story, really good prose at times, but like I said, dialogue is terrible. Characters, there's no really character development at all. There's not really, like Kino is indistinguishable from, there's no personality traits. Like there's just nothing really to latch on to in terms of like idiosyncrasies or weird things that he does. It's kind of bland in that regard. So B plus for this novel. Now getting into the analysis, this is where we enter spoiler territory. So like I said at the beginning, the main points, the main purpose of this novel is a sort of warning as to the potential dangers to acquiring wealth, whether it's earned or unearned, whether it's achieved through effort or through luck. And there's one quote that really stood out to me in this novel that I wanted to share with you, and it's as follows. A plan is a real thing. Quote, a plan is a real thing, and things projected are experienced. A plan once made and visualized becomes a reality along with other realities, never to be destroyed, but easily to be attacked. Thus, Kino's future was real, but having set it up, other forces were set up to destroy it. And this he knew, so that he had to prepare to meet the attack. And this Kano also knew, that the gods do not love men's plans, and the gods do not love success unless it comes by accident. He knew that the gods take their revenge on a man if he be successful through his own efforts. Consequently, Kino was afraid of plans, but having made one, he could never destroy it. And to meet the attack, Kino was already making a hard skin for himself against the world. His eyes and mind probed for danger before it appeared. So what really struck me with that quote is this idea that the gods do not like the success of men unless it's by accident. My governing principle was always the very opposite, because I've heard all these stories about people who win the lottery and suddenly their lives just fall apart because they get something, they acquire a bunch of wealth, but they haven't had to go through the strenuous process of learning how to make that wealth. They haven't had to go through the difficulties that are associated with that. So the novel, it's all about wealth and how wealth is dangerous by definition because wealth is that which people want. And if everybody could have it, everybody would have it already. And the reason it's wealth, or the reason some people have more and other people have less, is because other people are willing to take the risk of trying to get that thing. And some people pay the consequences of trying to get that thing. But as for that quote, it's almost like there's two sort of different angles to consider, like whether wealth acquiring through your own efforts or by accident or by luck, whether by efforts or by accident, through your own efforts, you sort of have to make exertions upon the world, and that's going to leave an impact. In the beginning, they receive the pearl by accident. And Kino's like, oh good, I received this pearl by accident. But the pearl, not only does it bring out the evil in others and it brings the evil encroaching upon them, it also brings the evil out in Kino a little bit, because he suddenly becomes attached to the pearl. And not only the people around him want the pearl and the wealth for themselves, he wants the wealth and the pearl for himself. And he doesn't really get punished that much in the beginning. That's not entirely true, but the real punishment, and this is the main spoiler of the novel, so click off now if you don't want to get this spoiled. The real punishment is when their infant dies. The infant gets shot in the head. And that is only triggered because of Kino's efforts. Kino attacks these guys who are tracking them and are probably going to kill them themselves. So he's really acting in self-defense, but all the same, he's exerting his own efforts. And it's only when he really starts to plan out his life and he's thinking, okay, I'm going to take the pearl over here and we're going to sell it there, and he has all these designs for his future and all these aspirations. It's not an accident anymore. When he first got it, it was an accident, but then once he starts making all these plans, then he starts to get punished for what he's doing. He could have just taken the deal from the buyers. The buyers are going to buy the pearl for 1,000 pesos, which is a crazy undervalue for the value of the pearl. The pearl should be worth like 50,000 pesos, but they're going to offer him 1,000 pesos because, the buyers, they're scheming and they're lowballing. So Kino, he could have taken this 1,000 pesos for the pearl and been happy, but instead he is scheming and he's thinking about his future, and he's attached to the pearl, and he doesn't want the 1,000 pesos. He wants the true wealth. And so it's not the accident of the wealth that he gets punished for. It's for the efforts that he puts in to get the wealth that he gets punished for. So in particular, I am interested to contrast this with the type of people who win the lottery nowadays, because that's really what this is like. You can think about some of the consequences that occur from winning the lottery. If you're someone who comes from a poor background and you have poor family members, suddenly those poor family members are going to see you differently. They're going to perceive you as something else unconsciously. They're going to want to ask you for money, ask you for favors. Your whole life is going to get changed. People are going to stab you in the back. You yourself are going to change. You're going to pick up new habits. You're going to start, not trusting people as much because, people are going to want stuff from you. It's not necessarily a pleasant reality to experience. So really, I think there's two things that we need to consider here. There is how wealth changes us, and there is how the potential for the sudden accumulation of new wealth changes us. And they're very different. There's a subtle difference, but they are very different. So suppose that we get $1 billion and our lives become comfortable and we slowly adjust to this new standard of living, and you begin to adopt billionaire perceptions, billionaire mannerisms. And this really shapes the way that you view the world. But that's not exactly what we're dealing with here in the Pearl. What we're dealing with in the Pearl is somebody who comes from an impoverished background, relatively speaking, an impoverished background, with the sudden, fleeting, but real possibility of transforming his life into that of a billionaire's. And not only by the accumulation of wealth, but also by his aspirations for his son to become literate. And this is getting into that other aspect of how wealth changes us. Wealth encourages us to think about the future of our children and our lineage. So that means education, that means moving to different places, that means strategizing in the long term, not just thinking about next year or the following year or crops or food, thinking in the long term. That's how wealth changes us. But there's also this short-term thing of how the potential of wealth changes us. And the change that we see in Kino is a vicious change. Even though the characters don't really blossom to life in the way that I would like them to, which I described earlier, we do see very real characteristics portrayed in the person. It's just the personality doesn't really come forth. And we see sort of his shadow open up when he realizes that he has the potential to acquire new wealth. And we see evil aspects in Kino come out. He even hits his wife at one point when the wife tries to throw the pearl into the ocean. Because she knows that the pearl has brought evil upon them. By the end of the novel, Kino has murdered 4 people. Maybe murder isn't quite the right word since it's largely in self-defense, but he's killed 4 people by the end of the novel. It's pretty hardcore, and the action scenes are actually pretty good. There's at the end, the action scene is really fun and exciting and intriguing and well written and fast-paced. But one last thing I think I will discuss is one of my mentors. It's a man named Dan Pena. He's very big on YouTube, and I don't recommend you check him out. He's not for everyone. He's a very brutal, harsh reality kind of teacher. He's really not for everybody. One of the things he always says is there is a cost to success. And that doesn't mean a material cost. That means there's going to be sacrifices you need to make in your life if you want to achieve extraordinary wealth. And that has very deep implications about everything, about the people you hang around with, about the sort of clothes you wear, about the way you hold your posture, about how you show weakness. To have wealth requires power, requires you to have some sense of control over your wealth. Otherwise, you'll get scammed, you'll get manipulated, people are going to bully you. Not even criminal, but just there are things that you'll get taken advantage of if you are weak. And we don't really see that side of the story in this novel, since Kino doesn't really see the full, he doesn't see the full blossoming of the potential that he envisions with his wealth. That's more of, that aspect is more dealt with in another novel I'm actually reading right now. I didn't even plan this, but I'm reading Great Expectations by Charles Dickens right now. And that's a really great novel which shows the other side of when you've earned your wealth and you're living this millionaire, billionaire lifestyle, and there are consequences to that and how you need to adjust your life. You need to adjust your mindset. You need to think about the relationships that you have with other people. So it's interesting actually that I'm reading both these novels at the same time. The Pearl I just finished. I'm planning to do a review of Great Expectations very soon. I really didn't plan that, but they're almost like two aspects of the same thing, which is when you're creating wealth, there's a real primitive side that comes out in you because you know it's a competition and you know there's other people that are also trying to create wealth. And then once you get there, there's going to be things that happen that you need to change about your life. But please let me know what you think of The Pearl and this analysis, and if there are any other aspects that we failed to cover. Let me know in the comments, and thank you. That's all.